In 1932, a remarkable young woman embarked on an incredible adventure. With no building skills and little in the way of tools and materials, she set out to tame a Cornish clifftop. Over the next 50 years, she created one of Cornwall's greatest landmarks through a combination of passion, enthusiasm, and endeavour. 70 years later, the legacy of Rowena Cade stands dominant over the Atlantic swell and is more popular than ever as thousands continue to be beguiled by the Minack Theatre. To those arriving at the Minack Theatre for the first time, they could be forgiven for imagining that it was built by Caesar's legions. But the truth is that this remarkable structure, perched on a Cornish cliff, was created in 1932 and planned, financed, and built by one frail but very determined woman, Rowena Cade.
The best view, I think, is when you see an aerial view of it, and then you realize that the theatre itself is a lovely thing to look at. It's like a sort of sculpture on an enormous scale. And I think the theatre itself is perhaps a greater thing, a greater work of art than all the plays that go on there even.
Well, the first thing you think is how incredibly steep it is. It's a bit like a Roman amphitheatre, I suppose, except there's no big, huge amphitheatre, and it's semicircular. But it's really quite small, but very high. And if you're at the top, you get a staggering view of the sea and the coastline to the left and right. And the stage is way, way below. It's like being in a gallery in the Gods in the West End Theatre.
I envy people seeing it for the first time, because I like to see people seeing it for the first time. And you get 20 steps down from the top of the theatre and the rest of the world is left behind. Whatever problems people have, I'm sure this place has a way of curing them.
The story of the Minack Theatre begins not in Cornwall, but in the Derbyshire village of Spondon. It was here, on the 2nd of August 1893, that Dorothy Mary Rowena Cade was born. She was the second of 4 children, and was the 5th generation of her family to live here at the homestead. Her childhood was secure. Her father owned a cotton mill, and her great-great-grandfather was the famous painter Joseph Wright. As she was growing up, Rowena would often create characters and stage imaginary plays in the garden of the homestead, or perform for the housemaids and servants that her wealthy parents employed. In 1902, Rowena had her first known contact with the theatre, taking the title role in her mother's production of Alice Through the Looking Glass. The 2 performances had audiences of 27 and 43. None of those present could have guessed at the unique contribution Rowena Cade would later make on English theatre. Just a few miles from Rowena's birthplace is the home of the Derby Shakespeare Company.
Why doth it not then make our eyelids sink?
Every season, amateur companies from all over Britain are invited to perform at the Minack. Following months of rehearsals, these companies arrive in Cornwall for their allotted week's residency.
There's going to be treads up.
Given the local connection with Rowena, it's fitting that Derby Shakespeare Company will perform the Tempest at the Minack on August the 16th, 2002.
No, he is gone.
70 years to the day since the very first performance at the Minack took place.
Europe with your daughter, but rather lose her to an African.
Remember, Hugh, that...
Although the company are regular visitors to the Minack, not all of the cast have appeared there before. For the director, there is a host of subtleties and nuances attached to performing at this unique venue.
You have to hold your face up, otherwise you're cheating the audience. They won't see anything of your face. So you have to bear that in mind as an actor. Also, the layout of the stage is kind of interesting. There's a bit of an uphill walk on stage, and that can cause you balance problems as an actor. It's actually better to be in the audience than on stage, because the backdrop's so amazing, you know, with the sea and the islands and the moon. It's just wonderful. It's really great. I just want them to have an extraordinary experience. I know the audience will. I know they will. Just sitting in the auditorium is extraordinary. Seeing the moon come up, you know, the changes in the light and everything. It's so beautiful. Totally unique. And as for the actors, I mean, I know they'll never forget it. You don't. It's a special week, and level of consciousness raises. It gets really high, and you go home, you take that with you. It's very special, yeah.
Following the death of her father, Rowena and her mother moved to Lamorna in Cornwall in 1921. The west of England was a far cry from the high life they had been used to.
I mean, Rowena came from a very comfortable background. But when her father died and Rowena and her mother sold up and moved to Cornwall, I mean, I think they were fairly comfortable. And so, as you say, she didn't have to work. And so her talents, her creative talents, but she was a busy person. You know, she didn't have to work, but she had to keep herself busy, I feel. And that's why she got involved in a lot of things, you know, creative things.
Throughout the 20s, entertainment in West Cornwall was self-made, with Minack House providing the setting for many theatrical productions, with Rowena involved in designing and making the costumes. Then, in 1928, Rowena, now aged 35, staged her most ambitious project yet.
She became friends with Dorothea and Valentine, who was the local vicar's daughter. And Dorothea was very much into theatre, and she directed a few local people in plays around here in Porthcurno and Penzance. So they decided to get a bit more adventurous and would have a go at an open-air Shakespeare. And I thought an ideal setting for, I mean, Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a great open-air Shakespeare, was, and they'd find a little meadow, and they actually found the meadow in Cream, which was my grandfather's meadow.
One of the cast in Crean's secluded valley was Edith Trenary, who played a fairy.
Well, we were about 10 children, all dressed as pixies and fairies. And there was this long sloping field where the audience could sit in. And at the bottom was a lovely flat first stage with the mushrooms and toadstools, which we danced around, and wooded trees at the background, and a river running through, and a nice flat place for the orchestra from Penzance came and played all the music. And well, as I say, it was very, very nice indeed. But after the first year, it was so nice that they begged Miss Cade to give it again, so we did. And of course, a lot of us, like me, grew out of our costumes and had to be dressed as singing fairies then. We had dresses with wings then.
With this performance a success, it was suggested that the next production should be The Tempest, held in Rowena's clifftop garden. But there was nowhere to seat an audience, so Rowena proposed a stage within the gully, above the Minack Rock.
So they set to in the winter of 31, 32, and scrabbled out this bare, you know, basically very similar to what we've got now, grass terraces with a grass stage, the same shape and size it is now, to put The Tempest on in 1932. And that was the start of the theatre we've got now. I don't think she had any great plans to build this theatre, and with the life it's had, I think it was a one-off venue for her friends to put on The Tempest in.
And so, on August the 16th, 1932, the first performance of The Tempest took place at the Minack Theatre.
It was lovely, a lovely thing really to see Ariel come up over the rocks, and at that time the porpoises went along. I mean, it all worked right, and the mist came up for the boat to be wrecked and all that, you know. It's like as if the elements worked with them somehow. Wonderful it was.
As the moon shone across the bay, the magic that is the Minack Theatre touched its first audience, and Rowena Cade realized she had started something that just had to continue. August 16th, 2002. Exactly 70 years to the day since Rowena Cade first staged the Tempest at the Minack Theatre, it is to be performed again. On such a special night that our nerves backstage as a capacity crowd gathers to celebrate the 70th anniversary.
Every group and every company that comes to perform at the Minack, they think that it's a great honour, and everybody's sort of so enthusiastic about it, and they always want to come back. There are very, very few people that I've ever met that have said, oh, well, Minack is Minack. Most people say, gosh, I've got to come again.
With the reputation of the Minack established, after 1932, Rowena set about making improvements to the theatre with the help of her two builders, Bill Rawlings and Tom Angove. It was back-breaking work, as granite was cut by hand, terraces infilled with earth, and small stones shovelled down from higher slopes.
I used to be glad to see him come home some days when I know what he's going to do down there to make sure he was safe. And lots of wind and weather out. Now, she was a very tall, thin person, and Tom used to be near to catch hold of her and her act quite often because the wind would lift her off the rock, you know, to save her, yes.
After a storm, she found a load of 12, 15-foot beams washed up on the beach. And so she was about to build the second tier of the dressing rooms. And so she was, thought this would be really useful for timber. So she dragged these 12, 15-foot beams up to the theatre. And I've never known quite the end. The end of the story that says, she went back down to the beach again and met up with the customs officer. I'm sure after 12, 15-foot beams, I wouldn't have gone down for another trip. But she went down again and met up with the customs officer on the beach. And he said, oh, excuse me, madam, I'm looking for some wood that's been washed up. And she said, well, I've just taken a load of wood up to the theatre up there. You're welcome to go up and have a look. And he took one look at this tall, wiry woman. There's no way she could have moved the beams that I'm looking for. And he never went and looked. And she said, I never told a lie. And they were incorporated in the roof of the dressing room to keep the roof up now.
But for all their hard work, the outbreak of World War II meant that the Minack fell silent. As Rowena looked after evacuees, barbed wire protected her real child from invasion. In 1944, however, the Minack became a location for Love Story, starring Stuart Granger and Margaret Lockwood.
Careful. All right? Come on, then.
The unit arrived with the grand piano that was to make Cornish Rhapsody a wartime hit. Getting the piano into the Minack was one thing. Getting it out was another matter altogether.
Michael Dyer, who was one of the managers, told me that he knew of 12 different pianos that had been taken to the Minack to use on the stage, and nobody had wanted to carry them back up, so they disappeared over the side into the sea. It's an amusing thought. All those strings jangling away when the tide comes in.
The theatre reopened with Penzance Grammar School's production of The Trojan Women in 1949. Since then, thousands of people have watched countless productions, all the while adhering to Rowena's policy of encouraging amateur theatre.
Many of the things I've seen at the Minack have been done by amateur groups or semi-professional groups, and it certainly seems to work there. But if that's true to the spirit of the founder, terrific. But I'm sure you could put on something that was incredibly professional and superbly orchestrated and great pyrotechnics. But in a way, you don't need it because the setting is so magnificent that nature is your set.
When we went to do Richard II in 1966, we had a crazed genius of a director called Adrian Benjamin, who is now a Church of England clergyman, and he decided that in the scene where the king lands on the coast of Wales, and he says, Barclafly Castle, call they this at hand, that we would actually arrive down at the water's edge and we would process up the rocky path to the stage. But of course, in order to arrive at the stage in time to hit our cue, we had to set off about 20 minutes before. So it was quite hard work, but I'm sure for the audience it was worth it.
She's famous for having used a wheelbarrow as an armchair. For her, that was a comfortable place to be because she was so used to building things. She was an immensely creative person who created on a scale that most of us can only dream of. A wonderful life to look back on, I think.
And that frail-looking woman would continue to work on each winter in all weathers until she was in her mid-80s.
In about 1976, I popped in one very cold October day just to see, to revive memories and all the rest of it. And there was this lone figure working away on the audience seats, doing a spot of grouting, I think, and the most weather-beaten face that I've ever seen. I think she must have spent most of her entire adult life in the open air. But, goodness me, without her, there would be no Minack experience of any kind.
What I loved about her was she said, yes, dear, well, it hasn't been entirely easy because, you see, I keep losing my staff, cooks and maids. And I say, well, I mean, do they not like Cornwall or you? No, it isn't about that, dear. But you said, you see, the trouble with the theatre is it isn't really totally natural. We have to get rocks from the beach and carry them 200 feet up the cliff. And when I say to my maids, and darling, when you've done the hoovering, just get the rocks and carry them up the cliff face, they often refuse to do it. And I said, well, I would refuse to do it. It's a very long climb and you can do your back in. But she was relentless.
In her late 80s, Rowena found it increasingly difficult to carry out the work needed at the Minack. However, she would continue to bellow instructions to her faithful builder's mate, Tom Angove.
Oh, he thought she was the most wonderful woman. He would never say no to nothing to her. You know, he stayed with her quite a lot towards the end. I know the latter part of her life. She said to Tom, if I can get in that wheelbarrow, do you think you can wheel me round? Tom said, if you can get in them, I will you. So she got in them, and Tom wheeled her all around the theatre for her to see everything she wanted to see, and that was the last time she ever saw the theatre.
In 1983, Rowena died, just short of her 90th birthday, leaving behind a theatrical legacy that inspires to this day. The Minack has been home to many genres of theatre in its lifetime, but it was built first and foremost for Shakespeare. And 70 years to the day since The Tempest was the first play to be staged at the Minack, Derby Shakespeare Company get their chance to perform it in this unique setting.
Don't work, you there!
Oh, it's magic because you've got that natural cliff top and you've got that extraordinary kind of stone seating. And of course, if you're doing The Tempest or King Lear and you get to those storms, and if you have the luck of the Cornish night and you get a storm. I once saw, when we were there, I think rehearsing Romeo, I saw an amateur King Lear. And it wasn't, I have to say, very good. But when they got to the storm, and we got a storm, you did think, I am in the only place possible to do this play. And it is absolutely enchanting on a summer's night when you get that setting and you get the sea going out ahead of you into the cliffs and the waves breaking way down below. For any of the great Shakespeares, it is absolutely unbeatable.
Thou liest, thou jesting monkey, thou! Oh, I would my valiant master would destroy thee! I do not lie!
And Rowena was all too aware of the suitability of staging Shakespeare at the Minack, as she would frequently remind people.
Well, it made a very good backdrop for any of the Shakespearean plays with the sea mentioned. I know so much more of Shakespeare than the modern works, and think the wildness of the theatre suits the bare scenic direction Shakespeare gives.
Oh, what do you mean? Don't close on such luggage! Let it alone and do the murder first!
There is no better play than The Tempest to stage at the Minack Theatre, and after months of rehearsals, the Derby Shakespeare Company conclude their 70th anniversary performance of The Tempest in front of a packed house.
And to the elements be free, and fare thee well.
It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I'm very emotional. Rowena Cade would be proud of that performance. And I know she would. In fact, it was weird because I thought I saw somebody pass me. I looked and there was nobody there, and I really felt as if there was a presence there, and I really do believe that she would have approved of that. I know that she would have.
The future of the Minack Theatre is assured with the formation of the Minack Theatre Trust following Rowena's death. Further building work at the theatre continues, with the hand of Rowena guiding all developments.
There was a little book that she put together in the 60s, and in the back page there was a list of things like, better dressing rooms, toilets, cafe, and things like that. There was a list of these little projects that we've sort of ticked off, not because we thought we must tick off Rowena's list, but it's because of things that have been needed to help us manage the people that come here and provide them with the facilities, and without over-commercialising the place. I think we just need to preserve it. I mean, I see myself as preserving the atmosphere and the ethos of the Minack, and preserving the very things that make it what it is, which is, this not a commercial venture, but a successful place to introduce people to theatre.
Everybody that I've ever spoken to thought she was just a wonderful person, and that she's given something to Cornwall, and to this part of Cornwall in particular, that very few people could ever give. I think if she was here today, she would look and say, did I really start all this? And I think it would have been said with pride.
But it's not only the Cornish who should be proud of the Minack. Everyone should revel in its existence and marvel at the determination and dedication that caused the Minack Theatre to be created. Perhaps an anonymous 1953 poem should have the final word. Good Cornish friends, we've tried tonight to grace the beauties of this site, where age-old rocks of granite brood in high majestic solitude, where gull and cormorant cry and wheel, and the boats on dancing keel, where wave on wave in magic flow trace a silvery course below. Why Mother Nature, ever wise, no fairer prospect could devise. So we, mere players, tread with awe above this matchless Minack shore.